That bird isn't dead, the old man said quietly. You're just listening to it wrong. The words barely carried over the dry Texas wind, but they cut through the noise on the tarmac sharper than any shouted order. The One Huey sat motionless under the late afternoon sun, its olive drab skin faded and dull, rotor blades drooping like tired arms that refused to lift again. Around it, a dozen technicians in clean coveralls moved with restless frustration, boots scraping against the concrete, tools clinking, laptop screens glowing with lines of data that all insisted the same thing. Everything was fine. But nothing was. Kyle Kramer kicked the landing skid again, the hollow thud echoing across the airfield. 6 hours, he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair, sweat darkening the collar of his uniform. 6 hours, and this thing won't even cough. Nearby, a portable fan hummed uselessly against the heat, pushing warm air in lazy circles. Lieutenant Daniel Wells stood with arms crossed, posture stiff, eyes fixed on the silent helicopter as if staring harder might force it back to life. Diagnostics are clean, one of the techs called out, tapping his screen. Fuel system checks out. Electricals green across the board. Kramer let out a short laugh, humorless and sharp. Yeah? Then why is it still a lawn ornament? The tension hung thick, stretched tight by a ticking clock no one wanted to mention out loud. Across the runway, under a shaded viewing area, a row of empty chairs waited, pressed uniforms, polished boots, and high-ranking eyes that would soon arrive expecting a flawless demonstration flight. This helicopter wasn't just a machine today. It was a promise. And right now, it was failing. Off to the side, unnoticed by most, an old man stood near the edge of the tarmac. He wore a faded green jacket, the fabric worn soft with time, and a pair of jeans that had seen more years than anyone on that flight line. His hands rested loosely in his pockets, posture relaxed, almost casual, as if he were watching something ordinary. But his eyes were not casual. Pale blue, steady, they traced the helicopter slowly, moving over rivets, seams, panels, lingering where others never looked. A mechanic brushed past him without a glance. Another nearly clipped his shoulder carrying a toolkit. To them, he was just background. Someone who didn't belong in a place. Filled with precision and urgency. Kramer noticed him eventually, pausing mid-step. Hey, he called out, voice edged with irritation. You lost or something? The old man didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of hot metal and fuel. Somewhere in the distance, a flag snapped sharply against its pole. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low, gravelly, but calm. No, Kramer raised an eyebrow, exchanging a look with Wells. Then you here to watch? A few of the younger techs snickered, grateful for the distraction. The old man tilted his head slightly, still studying the helicopter, as if the question barely registered. Just listening. Kramer scoffed, shaking his head. Listening? It's not playing music, old-timer. Laughter rippled lightly through the group, thin and nervous. The old man didn't react. His gaze shifted, just slightly, toward the engine housing, toward a panel so small most of them had already dismissed it hours ago. And for the briefest moment, the chaos of the tarmac seemed to quiet around him, as if the machine itself was waiting to be understood. The laughter faded faster than it should have, dissolving into an uneasy quiet that none of them could quite explain, as if something invisible had shifted in the air around that silent helicopter. Kyle Kramer exhaled through his nose and turned back toward the aircraft, waving a dismissive hand. All right, enough of this, he said, voice tightening. We have a schedule to keep. He walked straight to the open diagnostics station, tapping at the keyboard with sharper movements now, pulling up system overlays that had already been reviewed a dozen times. Every reading still glowed green, steady and confident, a perfect report from a machine that refused to behave like one. Lieutenant Daniel Wells stepped closer, lowering his voice. Command is asking for an update in 10 minutes. Kramer did not look at him. Then tell them it is under control. He said it quickly, almost automatically, as if saying it fast enough might make it true. Behind them, the old man shifted slightly, his boots scraping softly against the concrete. His eyes remained fixed on the Huey, not on the spinning numbers or digital charts, but on the stillness between them. The rotor mast creaked faintly as a breeze moved through the blades, a dry, hollow sound that most of the team ignored. Not him. He listened. A young airman, Lucas Reed, stood off to the side with a tablet in his hands, but his attention was no longer on the screen. His eyes kept drifting back to the old man, studying the way he watched the helicopter without urgency, without doubt. There was something unsettling about it, something that did not match the chaos surrounding them. Reed had spent enough time around aircraft to know the difference between someone guessing and someone recognizing. And this man was not guessing. Kramer straightened up suddenly and grabbed a wrench from the nearby cart, walking to the side of the engine housing. "We are opening it again," he announced. "I do not care what the system says." One of the technicians hesitated. "Sir, that panel is factory sealed. If we break it, we will have to file whatever you want after it flies," Kramer snapped. The tool clinked against the metal as he positioned it, ready to force the panel open. "Stop." The word was not loud, but it carried, cutting clean through the movement and sound like a line drawn across the moment. Kramer paused, turning slowly, irritation already rising. The old man had not moved closer, but his voice held something steady, something that did not ask for attention yet commanded it anyway. "If you open that," he said calmly, "you will fix nothing." A few of the technicians exchanged glances. Wells frowned. "And you would know that how?" The old man did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted slightly, following the line of the engine casing, then down toward a narrow seam just beneath it. "Because the problem is not where you are looking." Kramer let out a short, incredulous breath. "Oh, that is good," he said, stepping away from the panel with a sarcastic nod. "So where is it then?" The old man's eyes lifted, meeting his for the first time. There was no challenge in them. No hesitation either. "You are reading the data," he said, "but you are not hearing the machine." The words settled into the silence that followed, heavier than they should have been. Somewhere in the distance, a vehicle door slammed. The flag snapped again in the wind. Reed felt a chill run through him despite the heat, a quiet certainty forming in his chest that they were standing at the edge of something they did not yet understand. The words did not land like an argument. They landed like a certainty, and that was what unsettled them most. Kyle Kramer narrowed his eyes, studying the old man now with something closer to irritation than amusement, but beneath it, something quieter had begun to take shape, something he did not want to name. "You keep saying that," Kramer replied, his voice sharper now, "like this thing is alive." The old man did not smile. He did not correct him either. "It is not alive," he said, almost gently, "but it remembers how it is supposed to run." A faint metallic tick echoed from the helicopter as the engine cooled under the sun, a small sound, easily ignored, except it was not ignored this time. Lucas Reed heard it. He watched the old man's eyes shift slightly toward the source of the sound, as if tracking something invisible moving through the machine. Reed swallowed, glancing down at his tablet, then back up again. The numbers on his screen had not changed. Perfect readings. Perfect silence. It did not make sense. Lieutenant Wells stepped forward, impatience tightening his posture. "Sir, with all due respect, we do not have time for philosophy," he said. "This aircraft is grounded, and we have a command schedule to meet." The old man nodded once, acknowledging the urgency without reacting to it. "Then stop asking it the wrong questions," he said. Kramer let out a breath through his teeth, turning away for a moment before looking back again, as if trying to reset the situation into something he could control. "All right," he said, gesturing toward the helicopter with an open hand. "You think you know something we do not? Then say it clearly." The wind shifted again, carrying a low hum across the tarmac, distant but steady. The old man stepped forward for the first time, closing the gap by a few feet. Not enough to take control, just enough to see better. His boots made a soft, deliberate sound against the concrete. He did not touch the helicopter. Not yet. His gaze traced along the engine housing, then down toward the narrow seam he had noticed before. He tilted his head slightly, listening again. "When you try to start it," he said, "did you hear the second delay?" Kramer frowned. "There is no delay. The ignition sequence is immediate." The old man shook his head once. "No, there is a hesitation. Less than a second. But it is there." The technicians looked at each other. One of them shrugged slightly. Another frowned, replaying the sound in his mind. Reed felt it then, that moment, that tiny gap between what should have happened and what did. He had heard it. He just had not trusted it. Kramer crossed his arms. "Even if there was," he said, "what does that prove? The old man's eyes lifted again, steady and clear. It proves the machine is trying to tell you something. The silence that followed was heavier now, not awkward, not uncertain, but shifting, as if the entire team had taken one small step away from certainty and did not know how to step back. Reed made his decision before he could talk himself out of it. He turned slightly, stepping away from the group, pulling his phone from his pocket. His fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second, then moved. He did not call a supervisor. He did not call the operations desk. He dialed a number he had been told to use only if something felt wrong in a way that data could not explain. As the line rang softly in his ear, he looked back at the old man standing in front of the silent helicopter, watching it like it was not broken at all, just waiting for someone who knew how to listen. The phone line clicked once, then twice, before a calm voice answered on the other end, low and precise, carrying none of the background noise of a busy command center, only quiet focus. Lucas Reed swallowed, glancing over his shoulder as if the act itself might be noticed, then stepped a few feet farther away, lowering his voice. "Sir, this is Airman Reed on the Fort Holloway line. I am reporting something irregular." There was a pause, not hesitation, but attention sharpening on the other side. "Define irregular, Airman." Reed hesitated for a fraction of a second, searching for words that would not sound absurd. "We have a grounded UH-1. Full diagnostics are green. No faults. But it will not start." Another pause, shorter this time. "That is not irregular. That is maintenance." Reed looked back again, his eyes locking onto the old man, who still had not touched the helicopter, still only watching it as if it were speaking in a language no one else could hear. "There is a civilian here," Reed continued carefully. "He is not interfering. But he identified a delay in the ignition sequence that none of our systems are showing." Silence stretched on the line, deeper now, more focused. "What is his name?" the voice asked. Reed blinked. "He did not give one, sir." "Then describe him." Reed exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "Late 70s, maybe older. Worn green jacket. No insignia. No credentials visible. But—" He hesitated again, the next words feeling strange even as he said them. "He is not guessing, sir. He is certain." The silence that followed was no longer neutral. It shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something else. Then the voice returned, sharper now, carrying weight. "Stay where you are, Airman. Do not escalate. Do not remove him. I am making a call." The line went dead with a soft click. Reed lowered the phone slowly, his pulse quickening in a way he could not explain. Something had changed, and he could feel it moving outward, beyond the tarmac, beyond the base itself. Back near the helicopter, Kramer had lost patience completely. "All right, that is enough," he said, turning sharply toward the old man. "You have made your point. Now step back and let us do our job." The old man did not argue. He did not move away either. He simply shifted his weight slightly, his gaze returning to the narrow seam beneath the engine housing. "You already are doing your job," he said quietly. "You were just doing it in the wrong place." Kramer stepped forward, closing the distance, frustration now fully visible. "And you think standing there listening to metal is the right place?" The old man's eyes lifted again, meeting his without resistance. "I think," he said, "you are trying to make it obey you." The wind moved again, softer this time, carrying the faint smell of heated oil across the airfield. Somewhere behind them, a vehicle engine started, then stopped abruptly, as if the entire base itself had fallen slightly out of rhythm. Lieutenant Wells shifted uneasily, glancing toward the command building in the distance, then back at Kramer. "Sir," he said quietly, "we are out of time." Kramer did not respond right away. His jaw tightened as he looked from the silent helicopter to the old man, then back again, caught between certainty and something that no longer felt as solid as it had an hour ago. And for the first time that day, the machine did not feel like the only thing that had stopped working. The tension did not break, it stretched further, tightening across every movement, every breath, until even the smallest sound seemed louder than it should have been. Kyle Kramer stepped back half a pace, not retreating, but recalibrating, his eyes narrowing as he studied the old man in a way that had shifted from dismissal to something more cautious. "Then show me," Kramer said, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier edge, but still firm. "If we are wrong, show me where." The old man did not respond immediately. He turned his head slightly, listening again, as if the answer was not something to be explained, but something to be confirmed. The faint metallic tick came again, softer this time, almost swallowed by the wind, but it was there. He nodded once, more to himself than to anyone else. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he reached out. His hand did not move quickly. It moved with certainty, fingers brushing lightly against the outer casing of the helicopter, not pressing, not forcing, just making contact like someone placing a hand against a surface to feel its temperature. The technicians watched in silence. No one laughed this time. The old man slid his hand slowly along the metal, stopping just below the engine housing, right at the narrow seam he had been watching all along. He tapped it once, gently. A hollow sound answered, slightly off, almost too subtle to notice. Kramer frowned. He stepped closer, listening. The old man tapped again, this time shifting half an inch to the left. The sound changed. Not louder, not sharper, just different. Reed felt it in his chest more than he heard it. That small shift in tone that should not have been there if everything was as perfect as the diagnostics claimed. There, the old man said quietly. Kramer crouched down, running his hand over the panel, his fingers tracing the bolts, the edges, the alignment. Everything looked right. Every measurement would have passed inspection. But now that he was listening for it, the difference was impossible to ignore. That is, not possible, one of the technicians muttered under his breath. The old man did not look at him. It is not supposed to be, he said. Kramer stood slowly, wiping his hand against his pant leg as if grounding himself in something familiar. That panel covers a secondary coupling, he said, more to himself than anyone else. If that was off, the system would flag it. The old man nodded slightly. It is not off enough to trigger a fault, he replied. Just enough to hesitate. The words settled heavily. Hesitate. Not fail. Not break. Just hesitate. Wells stepped forward, his voice tighter now. Even if that is true, adjusting it means breaking the seal. That requires authorization. Kramer looked at the panel, then at the old man, then back again. For a moment, the chain of command, the procedures, the checklists, all pressed down at once. Then something shifted. We do not have time for paperwork, Kramer said quietly. The old man's hand dropped back to his side. He did not reach for a tool. He did not move to fix it. He simply stepped back half a step, clearing space, as if the next move did not belong to him. Reed felt it again. That same quiet certainty, spreading outward, as if the machine had already decided what would happen next. And somewhere beyond the tarmac, far from the heat and noise of the airfield, a call had already been answered, a name already moving through channels that did not need confirmation, carrying with it a weight that had nothing to do with rank or protocol, only recognition. The decision did not come with a command. It came with a shift in posture, a quiet moment where Kyle Kramer stopped looking at the data and started trusting what he had just heard with his own ears. He crouched again, closer this time, his hand hovering over the narrow seam as if it might move on its own if he waited long enough. Torque wrench, he said, not raising his voice. One of the technicians hesitated, then handed it over without a word. The tool felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, but because of what using it meant. Breaking a factory seal was not just a mechanical action. It was a decision that could not be undone. Lieutenant Daniel Wells stepped forward immediately. Kramer, he said, voice tight, controlled. We do not have clearance for this. Kramer did not look up. We do not have a helicopter either, he replied. The wind picked up slightly, brushing across the tarmac and through the rotor blades, producing that same hollow, uneven note that now everyone could hear. It was no longer background noise. It was a question hanging in the air. Kramer positioned the wrench carefully against the first bolt, pausing for just a fraction of a second before applying pressure. The metal gave with a short, clean snap, the seal breaking with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. A few of the technicians flinched instinctively. There was no going back now. The old man stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, watching without interference. He did not guide. He did not instruct. He simply observed, as if the outcome had already been decided long before the first bolt turned. Kramer removed the panel slowly, setting it aside with more care than he had shown anything else that day. Inside, the coupling assembly sat exactly where it should have been, clean, aligned, untouched by any obvious fault. For a moment, doubt flickered again. Then he saw it. Not a break. Not a failure. Just a slight misalignment. So small it could have been dismissed as a trick of the light if he had not been looking for it. There, he said quietly, almost to himself. He reached in carefully, adjusting the coupling by a fraction of an inch, the movement precise, controlled. No force, just correction. Reed held his breath without realizing it. Wells remained silent now, his earlier certainty replaced by something else, something closer to unease. Kramer replaced the panel, tightening the bolts one by one, each turn deliberate, each click of the wrench echoing faintly in the stillness around them. When he finished, he stood up slowly, wiping his hands again, though they were not dirty. The air felt different now, not lighter, just waiting. Kramer looked toward the cockpit, then back at the old man. If this does not work, he began, but the sentence did not finish. The old man gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Kramer turned, climbing into the cockpit with controlled movements, settling into the seat as if the weight of the entire base now rested on what would happen next. His hand moved to the ignition sequence, fingers steady despite everything. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the first click sounded, followed by a second. The rotor shifted slightly, and this time, there was no hesitation. The sound did not rush in all at once. It built, steady and controlled, like something remembering how to breathe after a long pause. The rotor turned once, then again, each rotation smoother than the last, the hollow, uneven note gone, replaced by a clean, rising hum that spread across the tarmac. Kyle Kramer sat still in the cockpit for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, his hand still resting near the controls, as if waiting for the hesitation to return. It did not. The engine responded without resistance, the system aligning with itself as though the delay had never existed. Outside, the technicians stood frozen, not in shock, but in recognition. They had all seen it. They had all heard it. And none of their instruments had told them it was there. Lucas Reed felt his chest tighten slightly, not from tension, but from the release of it. He lowered his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the old man, who had already shifted his attention away from the helicopter, as if the outcome no longer required his presence. Lieutenant Daniel Wells took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on the spinning rotor, then down toward the panel that had just been opened and resealed. That should not have worked, he said quietly. No one answered him. Kramer powered the system down again after a brief moment, the rotor slowing with controlled precision, the machine settling back into stillness, but not the same stillness as before. This one carried certainty. He climbed down from the cockpit, his boots hitting the tarmac with a dull, grounded sound. For a moment, he said nothing. He just looked at the helicopter, then at the panel, then finally at the old man. The arrogance that had defined him earlier was gone, not replaced with submission, but with something quieter. Respect, forming slowly, like a realization that had taken longer than it should have. You knew, Kramer said, his voice low. It was not a question. The old man met his gaze briefly, then looked past him, toward the open stretch of runway beyond. It was telling you, he replied. The words settled deeper than anything else that had been said that day. Reed shifted slightly, his phone still in his hand, the call from earlier echoing in the back of his mind. Somewhere, someone had listened. And now, the consequence of that call was approaching, though none of them could see it yet. In the distance, faint at first, a new sound began to rise. Not mechanical, not part of the flight line routine. Tires on pavement, moving faster than normal for this part of the base. Wells turned his head instinctively, eyes narrowing toward the access road that led to the tarmac. A dark vehicle appeared at the edge of the runway, followed by another, both moving with quiet urgency, not chaotic, but deliberate. The technicians noticed it next, their conversations fading before they could begin. Kramer followed their gaze, his expression tightening slightly, confusion replacing the last traces of certainty he had regained. The vehicle slowed as they approached, coming to a precise stop just beyond the marked line. The engines cut off almost simultaneously, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. The doors did not open right away. For a brief moment, everything held still, as if the entire base was waiting for something to step into place. The old man did not turn to look. He already knew what was coming. The doors opened in unison, not hurried, not delayed, but with the kind of precision that did not need to announce itself. Polished boots met the tarmac one after another, the sharp sound echoing across the now silent airfield. Conversations that had not yet started died before they could form. Every set of eyes shifted toward the arriving vehicles, drawn not by curiosity, but by instinct. Authority had a way of changing the air before a single word was spoken. A man stepped out from the lead vehicle, his uniform immaculate, every line exact, every detail in place as if the heat and dust of the tarmac did not exist for him. General Marcus Hale did not look around to assess the situation. He did not need to. His gaze moved once across the helicopter, the technicians, the open space between them, and then stopped. Not on Kramer. Not on Wells. On the old man. The distance between them was no more than 20 feet, but in that moment, it felt like the rest of the world had stepped back. Kramer straightened instinctively, his posture snapping into something closer to regulation, though no command had been given. Wells followed half a second later, tension returning to his shoulders, but now it carried a different weight. This was no longer about a malfunctioning aircraft. The general began to walk forward, each step measured, deliberate, the gravel beneath his boots crunching in a steady rhythm that filled the silence. No one moved to intercept him. No one spoke. Reed felt his breath catch slightly, his earlier call echoing louder in his mind now. This was the response. Not a message. Not an instruction. Presence. As the general closed the distance, something subtle shifted across his expression, not visible to everyone, but unmistakable to those watching closely. Recognition. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Recognition that had been waiting for confirmation. He stopped a few feet in front of the old man, close enough that the difference in rank, in position, in authority should have been obvious to anyone standing there. But it was not. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved lightly across the tarmac, brushing against fabric and metal, carrying the faint hum of the recently revived helicopter as it settled into silence again. Then, without announcement, without hesitation, General Hale brought his hand up in a crisp, controlled motion. It was not exaggerated. It was not for display. It was precise, exact, and absolute. A salute. The gesture landed heavier than any shouted order could have. Kramer felt it before he fully understood it, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. Wells blinked once, then again, as if the moment might shift back into something familiar if he waited long enough. It did not. The old man did not return the salute immediately. He simply looked at the general, his expression unchanged, calm, steady, as if this moment had already passed somewhere else long before it reached this tarmac. And when he finally moved, it was not hurried, not ceremonial, just a quiet acknowledgement, a slight nod that carried more weight than the gesture it answered. The general lowered his hand slowly, his voice when it came low and clear. "Sir," he said, "we have been trying to find you." The words settled across the airfield like a line drawn between two worlds, one built on rank and structure, the other on something older, something that did not need to be announced to be understood. And for the first time that day, every person standing there realized they had not been watching a problem get solved. They had been standing in the presence of someone the system itself recognized. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and final, as if they had been waiting far longer than the moment that carried them. General Hale remained standing where he was, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady, not demanding a response, not expecting one, only acknowledging something that did not need to be explained. Around them, the tarmac remained still, the usual rhythm of movement and noise replaced by a silence that no one dared to break. Kyle Kramer felt it in the way his shoulders held tension he could not release, in the way his eyes moved between the general and the old man, searching for something familiar and finding nothing that fit the rules he had trusted his entire career. Lieutenant Wells stood rigid, but not out of discipline alone. This was something else, something that did not come from training manuals or command briefings. It came from understanding, arriving too late to prepare for. The old man looked at the general for a moment longer, then shifted his gaze back toward the helicopter, as if the machine still deserved more of his attention than the moment unfolding around him. "You found me," he said quietly. It was not a question. The general gave a small nod. "We have been trying," he replied. "But you do not make that easy." A faint trace of something passed through the old man's expression, not quite a smile, not quite regret, just recognition. That was the point. The wind moved again, softer now, brushing across the tarmac, carrying the clean, steady scent of an engine that was no longer struggling to find its rhythm. Reed stood a few steps back, his phone still in his hand, though he had long forgotten it was there. He watched the exchange, understanding now that what he had done had not started something. It had simply allowed something already in motion to arrive. Kramer finally stepped forward, not with authority, but with a hesitation that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "Sir," he said, addressing the general, though his eyes flicked briefly toward the old man. "We did not know," the sentence trailed off, unfinished, because there was nothing he could say that would make sense of what had already happened. General Hale turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. "No," he said calmly. "You did not." There was no accusation in the words. No correction. Just a statement that carried its own weight. The old man turned then, finally stepping away from the helicopter, his movements unhurried, as if the urgency that had consumed everyone else had never touched him at all. He paused briefly beside Kramer, not looking at him directly, but close enough that the younger man could feel the presence beside him. "You were not wrong," he said quietly. "You were just listening to the wrong thing." Kramer did not respond. He could not, because for the first time that day, he understood exactly what that meant. The old man continued walking, passing between the silent technicians, none of whom moved to stop him, none of whom would have known how. The general watched him go, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, but his eyes followed with a respect that did not need to be spoken again. The vehicles remained where they were, engines quiet, as if even they understood that nothing more needed to be said. And as the sound of the wind returned, filling the space left behind, the lesson settled into every person standing there, not as a command, not as an instruction, but as something quieter, something lasting. Some machines can be fixed with tools. Others require something that cannot be measured. And some people never needed recognition, because they had already lived beyond it.